The steering wheel spun uselessly in my hands as the SUV barreled down the slope. My foot jammed against the brake pedal, but it sank straight to the floor with no resistance. The red light at the intersection ahead glared like an executioner's signal. Cars streamed across in both directions, horns blaring, drivers oblivious to the disaster bearing down on them. I had only seconds. A sickening clarity hit me, sharper than the screech of metal. This wasn't an accident. Someone had tampered with my brakes. And deep in my bones, I knew exactly who wanted me dead. My daughter. The oak tree appeared at the side of the road, thick-trunked, older than the town itself. I yanked the wheel hard right, aiming for it with grim purpose. Better the tree than a collision that might kill a family of strangers. Better me broken than innocent people gone. The impact exploded through my chest. The airbag slammed into my face like a cruel hand, and the seatbelt carved into my ribs. Glass shattered, raining down in glittering shards. The world spun, then went white. When sound returned, it was a blur of shouts and sirens. Blood trickled down my forehead, warm and sticky. My hands shook against the deflated airbag. But I was alive. Against all odds, I had survived. And in that dazed, painful moment, one truth burned brighter than the emergency lights flashing around me. Caroline had just tried to kill me. 12 hours earlier, we had stood together in my kitchen. I was still wearing black from my husband Richard's funeral, the scent of lilies from the church clinging to my sleeves. 44 years of marriage had ended with lung cancer that spread faster than we could say the word hospice. Richard had been 71, a quiet man, a careful man. He had read financial statements the way other men read novels, always with a pencil in hand. I had known he saved and invested, but I never imagined the scale of it. When the lawyer opened the envelope, my breath caught. $45 million. All of it in my name. Caroline's eyes had gleamed when she said it. Not tears, not grief, not even the barest respect for the man we'd buried less than 3 days earlier. Only calculation. Her husband Eric had leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "It's more than you could ever spend, Liz. You're 70. What do you need $45 million for? Let's divide it now, while it can make a difference." Joshua, their 17-year-old, had looked at his phone, face turned away, unwilling to meet my eyes. The whole thing felt rehearsed, like a play they'd practiced until the lines came smooth. I had refused, of course. Richard's wishes were clear. The money was mine to manage, to use, to give as I saw fit. But as Caroline's hand closed around mine, damp, insistent, I had felt something twist in my stomach. A darkness I had never wanted to see in my own child's face. "You don't have to worry about anything, Mom," she had whispered. "We'll handle it all for you. You just relax and enjoy what time you have left." As if I were already gone. Now, strapped to a stretcher as paramedics examined my pulse, I replayed those words. "What time you have left?" Was that her warning? Her promise? A young EMT leaned close, his eyes kind but urgent. "Ma'am, don't move. We'll get you to the hospital. You're lucky. You should have been killed instantly hitting that tree." Lucky. Number. This wasn't luck. It was survival. It was Richard's voice in my ear telling me to hold on. It was $45 million they could not touch as long as I still drew breath. The sirens wailed louder as the ambulance doors closed around me. My ribs throbbed, my head spun, but one thought anchored me, heavy and cold. If Caroline and Eric were willing to cut my brakes for money, they wouldn't stop here. They would try again. And next time, if I wasn't ready, I might not be so lucky. The hospital discharged me with stitches across my forehead, bruises blooming purple on my ribs, and a doctor's warning to take it easy. I nodded, promised I would, but in truth my mind was racing faster than my heartbeat. The brake line hadn't failed by accident. I had driven that SUV for 10 years, kept up with every oil change and inspection. Richard had drilled the habit into me. Take care of the little things before they become big ones. The little thing, this time, had been sabotage. Back at home, the house felt cavernous without him. Richard's slippers still sat under his chair, his glasses still folded on the end table where he'd left them the night before his final hospital stay. 44 years of shared life, and now silence pressed in around me. That was when Caroline arrived. Not alone. Eric followed at her shoulder, wearing the too tight smile of a man who wanted something. Behind them trailed Joshua, lanky and restless, earbuds dangling around his neck. He offered me the faintest nod before retreating toward the living room couch, as though he wanted no part of what was coming. Caroline set a thick brown envelope on the kitchen table. She didn't ask how I felt. She didn't ask about the accident. She didn't even glance at the stitches along my hairline. "Mom," she said briskly, "we need to talk about Dad's estate." The word estate landed like an insult. To me, Richard wasn't an estate. He was my husband, my partner in every sense. To her, he was a number. I sank into a chair. "Caroline, your father was buried 3 days ago. Couldn't this wait?" Eric cut in, his voice eager, almost gleeful. "It's more than we thought, a lot more." He tapped the envelope. 45 million, Liz, that's the figure. My breath caught. Even though the lawyer had already told me, hearing the number aloud felt unreal. $45 million. Richard, the quiet accountant who'd driven a decade-old sedan and clipped grocery coupons, had built a fortune without ever bragging about it. Caroline slid the papers toward me. "It's all in your name." "But really, Mom, what sense does that make? You're 70 now. What are you going to do with that kind of money?" Her eyes gleamed, sharp and hungry. I pressed my palm flat against the table to keep it from trembling. "Your father left it to me for a reason. He trusted me to use it wisely." Caroline leaned forward, lowering her voice into the same tone she'd once used to coax me into letting her borrow the car as a teenager. "Or, you could trust us. Eric and I can manage it, pay off our debts, put Joshua through college. You'll never have to worry about bills or investments again." Eric nodded eagerly. "It's the responsible thing. No one your age needs that kind of burden." I looked from one to the other. My daughter, my own flesh and blood, and the man she'd married, speaking to me as though I were a problem to be managed, a relic taking up space. My chest tightened. Not from the bruised ribs, but from the chill in their words. Joshua shifted on the couch, his eyes glued to the phone in his hands. His silence spoke volumes. He knew this conversation was wrong. He didn't want to be part of it. "Richard made his wishes clear," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "He left everything to me, with instructions I can use it as I see fit. That's what I intend to do." Caroline's mask slipped for just a second, her lips pulling back in something between a snarl and a smile. "Don't be selfish, Mom. You've had your life. It's our turn now." The room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the chair, forcing myself not to flinch. "Selfish," I repeated softly. "After 44 years of marriage, after burying your father with my own hands, you call me selfish for following his wishes?" Eric leaned forward, his tone hardening. "You don't need 45 million. We do. If you care about your family, you'll sign the transfer papers." For a moment, the only sound in the kitchen was the hum of the refrigerator. I saw Richard's handwriting in my mind, the careful strokes of his signature on the will, the clause he had added with such foresight. He had known this moment might come. "I'll think about it," I said, buying time, though in my heart the answer was already no. Caroline's fingers closed around mine, damp and cold. "Don't think too long. You don't want to make us do something drastic." The words slid across my skin like ice water. A threat, thinly veiled. When they left, the house felt darker than before. Joshua gave me one last look from the doorway, his eyes apologetic, almost pleading. Then the door shut, and the sound of their car faded down the street. I sat alone at the table, staring at the envelope, my ribs aching with each shallow breath. $45 million, Richard's legacy, sat on those pages. But what chilled me wasn't the number. It was the realization that my own daughter had just drawn a line in the sand, and I would soon find out just how far she was willing to cross it. That afternoon, I drove .ca Refily, in a rental car this time, to Mark Douglas's office. Mark had been our attorney for nearly 20 years, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and never charged for quick phone calls. His office smelled of old books and leather, lined with diplomas and photographs of his grandchildren. He greeted me with a gentle handshake. "Liz, I was expecting you." I raised an eyebrow. "Your daughter's been calling me," he admitted, 6 times in the past week. asking questions she has no right to ask. I told her I could only discuss Richard's estate with you, but she's persistent. The word persistent felt too polite. Mark slid a copy of Richard's will across the desk. I traced my fingers over Richard's signature, steady and deliberate, just as he had signed every check, every permission slip, every card in 44 years of marriage. Richard was clear, Mark said. Everything passes to you, with no restrictions on how you use it. But he also added a clause. He flipped to the second page. If you give away more than half the estate within the first year, the remainder defaults to the American Cancer Society. I blinked, the words blurring. Why? Mark leaned back, folding his hands. Because Richard anticipated pressure. He wanted to protect you from being cornered or manipulated. He knew how insistent Caroline could be. The ache in my ribs deepened. Richard had seen this coming. Even as cancer hollowed his body, he'd been thinking of me, shielding me from battles I didn't know I'd face. Mark's voice gentled. He trusted you, Liz. He didn't want anyone else dictating your choices. I swallowed hard. Caroline doesn't know about this clause, does she? No, he said firmly, and I suggest you keep it that way, at least for now. I nodded, though unease crawled up my spine. Secrets had a way of seeping out, and my daughter had never been one to take no gracefully. That evening, Caroline and Eric showed up unannounced, standing in the doorway with expectant smiles that didn't reach their eyes. Mom, Caroline said sweetly, we thought we could have a family meeting. Just talk it through. Eric's jaw was set tight, like a man trying too hard to play calm. I let them in. Joshua trailed behind, shoulders hunched, earbuds in. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Caroline started immediately. We know $5 million sounds small compared to the total, but really, Mom, it's more than enough for you. Think about it. New kitchen, travel, anything you want. You'd be set for life. And Eric and I could take care of the rest. Doesn't that sound fair? Fair. The word clanged in my ears. No, I said quietly. Eric's chair scraped against the floor as he leaned forward. You're being unreasonable. You don't need that kind of money. We do. If you cared about your family, you'd do the right thing. I looked at Caroline. Her eyes were hard, her smile brittle. The right thing, she echoed. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. My heart pounded. For a moment I thought of Richard's careful planning, the clause that protected me. Then I thought of the empty brake pedal beneath my foot that morning, the way the car had hurtled forward without mercy. Blood ties or not, something darker was at work here. I pushed back my chair, forcing strength into my voice. This discussion is over. Leave my house. For a flicker of a moment, I saw it. The fury beneath Caroline's polished exterior, the desperation in Eric's clenched fists. They left with slammed doors and the squeal of tires. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the envelope of Richard's legacy still on the table. $45 million had become a battlefield, and my own daughter had just declared war. The next morning I brewed a pot of coffee and tried to steady my hands enough to hold the cup. The kitchen clock ticked louder than usual, a metronome marking the unease in my chest. Richard had always been the morning person, humming softly as he read the paper, circling stock tickers with his fountain pen. Now, the chair across from me sat empty, and the silence gnawed. The phone rang. Caroline. I considered letting it go to voicemail. But a mother always answers, even when she knows the call will bruise. Mom, she said, skipping the greeting. Eric and I talked all night. We've come up with a plan that works for everyone. You'll have $5 million. That's more than enough for you to live comfortably. We'll manage the rest. $5 million. Out of 45. She spoke as though she was doing me a favor. Caroline, I said slowly, I just buried your father. I need time. You don't have time, she snapped. The longer we wait, the more complicated things get. Taxes, investments, paperwork. We're trying to help you. The old teacher in me wanted to correct her tone. The mother in me wanted to weep. Instead, I said nothing. She filled the silence. You've always said family takes care of family. Well, that's what we're doing. Dad would have wanted us to be secure. Eric's business, it's struggling. Joshua's looking at colleges. We're drowning, Mom. And you're sitting on a fortune. My ribs ached as I drew in a sharp breath. Your father left that fortune to me. He trusted me to use it wisely. Her voice softened, but only on the surface. "Then use it wisely, Mom. Give it to us. Don't let it go to waste." When she hung up, I sat staring at the receiver, the hum of the dial tone echoing through my head. The pressure was building, and it was only going to get worse. That afternoon, I drove .ca Refily, in a rental car this time, to Mark Douglas's office. Mark had been our attorney for nearly 20 years, the kind of man who remembered birthdays and never charged for quick phone calls. His office smelled of old books and leather, lined with diplomas and photographs of his grandchildren. He greeted me with a gentle handshake. "Liz, I was expecting you." I raised an eyebrow. "Your daughter's been calling me," he admitted, 6 times in the past week, asking questions she has no right to ask. I told her I could only discuss Richard's estate with you, but she's persistent. The word persistent felt too polite. Mark slid a copy of Richard's will across the desk. I traced my fingers over Richard's signature, steady and deliberate, just as he had signed every check, every permission slip, every card in 44 years of marriage. "Richard was clear," Mark said. "Everything passes to you, with no restrictions on how you use it." But he also added a clause. He flipped to the second page. "If you give away more than half the estate within the first year, the remainder defaults to the American Cancer Society." I blinked, the words blurring. "Why?" Mark leaned back, folding his hands. "Because Richard anticipated pressure. He wanted to protect you from being cornered or manipulated. He knew how insistent Caroline could be." The ache in my ribs deepened. Richard had seen this coming. Even as cancer hollowed his body, he'd been thinking of me, shielding me from battles I didn't know I'd face. Mark's voice gentled. "He trusted you, Liz. He didn't want anyone else dictating your choices." I swallowed hard. "Caroline doesn't know about this clause, does she?" "No," he said firmly, "and I suggest you keep it that way, at least for now." I nodded, though unease crawled up my spine. Secrets had a way of seeping out, and my daughter had never been one to take no gracefully. That evening, Caroline and Eric showed up unannounced, standing in the doorway with expectant smiles that didn't reach their eyes. "Mom," Caroline said sweetly, "we thought we could have a family meeting. Just talk it through." Eric's jaw was set tight, like a man trying too hard to play calm. I let them in. Joshua trailed behind, shoulders hunched, earbuds in. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Caroline started immediately. "We know 5 million sounds small compared to the total, but really, Mom, it's more than enough for you. Think about it. New kitchen, travel, anything you want, you'd be set for life. And Eric and I could take care of the rest. Doesn't that sound fair?" "Fair." The word clanged in my ears. "No," I said quietly. Eric's chair scraped against the floor as he leaned forward. "You're being unreasonable. You don't need that kind of money." "We do. If you cared about your family, you'd do the right thing." I looked at Caroline. Her eyes were hard, her smile brittle. "The right thing," she echoed. "Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." My heart pounded. For a moment, I thought of Richard's careful planning, the clause that protected me. Then I thought of the empty brake pedal beneath my foot that morning, the way the car had hurtled forward without mercy. Blood ties or not, something darker was at work here. I pushed back my chair, forcing strength into my voice. "This discussion is over. Leave my house." For a flicker of a moment, I saw it. The fury beneath Caroline's polished exterior, the desperation in Eric's clenched fists. They left with slammed doors and the squeal of tires. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the envelope of Richard's legacy still on the table. $45 million had become a battlefield, and my own daughter had just declared war. The house never felt quite the same after that night. Every creak in the floorboards, every whisper of wind against the windows, set my nerves on edge. Richard used to joke that our old place had a personality of its own, but now it felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for the next blow. It started small. The morning paper, which had been delivered faithfully for 12 straight years, vanished from the driveway. Not once, not twice, but 3 mornings in a row. When I called the distribution office, the woman on the phone apologized profusely. "Mrs. Carter, we haven't missed your house in years. Our carrier swears he left it." I brushed it off at first. Mistakes happen. But then the mailbox appeared dented. the metal door hanging by one hinge as if someone had taken a bat to it. The mail inside, bills, bank statements, condolence cards, was strewn across the street. Neighbors shook their heads when I asked if they'd seen anything. "Teenagers?" one man suggested, though his voice carried doubt. By Thursday, I came home from the grocery store to find my trash cans tipped and garbage scattered across the yard. Coffee grounds, eggshells, the embarrassing remains of 2 frozen dinners I hadn't had the heart to cook properly. It wasn't just vandalism, it felt personal. And deep down, I knew whose fingerprints, if not literally, then figuratively, were all over it. Caroline. Still, I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. She was my daughter. Surely she wouldn't stoop to intimidation, but the pit in my stomach argued otherwise. The truth became undeniable on Saturday morning. I had a meeting scheduled with a financial advisor downtown, just a 20-minute drive, a route I'd taken dozens of times. I carried my folder of documents, Richard's investment accounts, the will, a notebook where I'd scrawled questions about mutual funds and retirement planning. Normal widow's business, the kind Richard would have handled with calm assurance. I slid into the driver's seat of my SUV, turned the key, and eased into reverse. The brake pedal felt spongy, softer than usual. Odd, I thought. Maybe condensation. Richard had taught me that cars sometimes act funny in cool weather. But by the time I reached the stop sign at the end of the street, my foot pressed nearly to the floor before the car lurched to a halt. Something was wrong. I told myself I'd get it checked after my meeting. I wanted to believe it was nothing. But when I reached the main road, my denial shattered. The brake pedal collapsed to the floor like a dead weight, and the car barely slowed. Traffic loomed ahead, horns blaring as I swerved to avoid a sedan. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might crack a rib already sore from grief. Then came the hill. The oak tree at the bottom. The red light. I gripped the steering wheel and understood, with a clarity that chilled my bones, that this was no malfunction. Someone had cut my brake line. And the only people with motive lived under Caroline's roof. Hours later, after the ambulance, the hospital, and the questions I dodged from polite nurses, I sat in my living room with the lights off. My ribs burned, my head throbbed, but the pain I felt most wasn't physical. It was betrayal, raw and undeniable. I thought of Richard, of his steady hands balancing checkbooks, his quiet faith in our daughter even when she stumbled. He hadn't wanted me to fight this war. He had tried to shield me with clauses and signatures, but he couldn't stop what Caroline had already begun. They wanted me afraid, alone, weak enough to hand over everything just to make the fear stop. Instead, something inside me hardened. If Caroline and Eric believed I was going to crumble, they didn't know me as well as they thought. I had survived grief, I had survived the crash, and I would survive whatever came next. But I couldn't do it blind. I needed proof. Something undeniable. Something that would show the world what they were capable of. Because until I had that, all I had were suspicions. And suspicions weren't enough to stop a daughter who looked at her own mother and saw nothing but a dollar sign. I didn't sleep much after the crash. Every groan of the house sounded like an intruder. Every passing car made my chest tighten. I kept replaying the moment the brake pedal gave way, the sickening glide toward that oak tree. Fear sat heavy in my stomach, but so did determination. If I was right. If Caroline and Eric had truly crossed that line, then fear alone wouldn't protect me. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable evidence that no one could twist or explain away. On Monday morning, I called a local security company. The technician who arrived was younger than my daughter, with sharp eyes and a tool bag slung over her shoulder. She introduced herself as Chloe Nguyen. "What are you looking for, Mrs. Carter?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. "Peace of mind," I said. Then, after a pause, "and proof, if anyone tries to hurt me." Her eyes flicked to the stitches on my forehead, the bruises along my jaw. She didn't ask questions, but I saw understanding settle across her face. "We'll install cameras at every entry point," Chloe explained, moving briskly from door to window. "Motion-activated high-resolution night vision. They'll upload directly to a secure cloud. If anything happens, you'll have a record." That was exactly what I needed. By the time she left, small black lenses dotted my walls and ceilings like watchful eyes. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I felt a flicker of safety. It took only 4 nights for that feeling to shatter. I was reviewing footage on my laptop, fast-forwarding through hours of empty hallways and quiet rooms, when the motion alert pinged. My finger froze on the trackpad. Timestamp, 2:17 a.m. The camera in the kitchen showed the back door easing open. Caroline. My daughter stepped inside like she owned the place, the spare key I'd given her years ago glinting in her hand. She moved quietly but not cautiously, her eyes scanning cupboards, drawers, even the refrigerator. She wasn't stealing, she was searching. I leaned closer to the screen as she drifted down the hallway, her pale face illuminated in infrared. She slipped into my office, lifted her phone, and began photographing documents on my desk. Bank statements, insurance policies, Richard's letters. But the worst moment came when she opened the bedroom door. There I was, just 15 feet away, sleeping under the quilt Richard's mother had sewn decades ago. Caroline stood in the doorway, her expression cold and calculating. She watched me for nearly a full minute, her chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, like a scientist observing an experiment. Then she turned and left as quietly as she had come. My hand trembled on the mouse. I couldn't breathe. My own daughter had stood over me in the dark, not with concern, not with love, but with the gaze of someone considering a problem to be solved. The next night was worse. This time she didn't come alone. Eric followed her through the same back door, latex gloves snapping into place as if he'd rehearsed. They moved quickly, rifling through drawers, lifting papers, photographing everything. The camera caught Eric opening the drawer of my nightstand and pulling out the small stash of emergency cash Richard had insisted I keep. He grinned as he thumbed through the bills before stuffing them back, like a thief too arrogant to hide his tracks. Caroline lifted my pill bottles from the bathroom cabinet, holding them up to the camera's unblinking eye without realizing it. Blood pressure medication. Cholesterol tablets. Common enough for a 70-year-old widow. And then I heard it. The audio feed, faint but unmistakable. "The brake thing didn't work," Eric whispered, frustration dripping from his tone. "She's tougher than we thought," Caroline replied flatly, "or luckier." "Luck runs out," Eric said. Caroline held up the bottle of blood pressure pills, shaking it lightly so the pills rattled. "This will be Plan B. A little extra potassium, and it'll look like natural causes. Heart failure at her age? No one questions that." "How much?" Eric asked. "Enough to stop her heart," Caroline said calmly, "but not enough to show in a basic autopsy. I've researched it. The key is making it look like she got confused with her dosages, maybe took too many by accident." My stomach lurched. The casual way she spoke, as if discussing a grocery list, chilled me to my marrow. They stayed nearly an hour, mapping out my routines, whispering strategies, snapping photos of every document in sight. When they finally left, the silence of the house felt heavier than ever. I sat in the glow of the laptop screen until dawn, my hands trembling as the footage replayed again and again. My daughter, my Caroline, had conspired to murder me, not in anger or desperation, but with cold calculation, for money. And now I had proof. Hours of footage. Audio of their whispered plans. Images of them breaking into my home, pawing through my life as if I were already gone. It was enough to destroy them in court, but that realization brought no comfort. Because until I acted, until I brought this evidence to someone who could stop them, I was still their target. And they would not stop trying. Detective Angela Ruiz sat across from me in her office, her dark eyes scanning the laptop footage I'd brought. I watched her face change. First, disbelief. Then anger, then a cold kind of focus. "Mrs. Carter," she said, pausing the video where Caroline rattled my pill bottle, "this is more than conspiracy. This is attempted murder and planning. We can arrest them right now." I shook my head, my ribs aching as I straightened in the chair. "They'll deny it. Say it was just talk. I want them caught in the act. No way out." She leaned back, fingers steepled. "That carries risk. We'd need you wired, officers in place, medical personnel on standby. If they actually poison you, "I've already survived once," I said, cutting her off. "I'll survive again, but I want them stopped, for good." Detective Ruiz nodded grimly. Then we set the trap. The plan came together quickly. I would invite Caroline for dinner, act as if nothing had changed, as if I were the same weary, grieving widow she imagined me to be. I'd wear a wire, a thin strip taped beneath my blouse, transmitting every word. Unmarked patrol cars would circle the block. An ambulance would wait nearby. And if things went too far, I would speak a single word into the hidden mic. Butterfly. That would bring the cavalry. Caroline arrived at 6 on the dot, grocery bags in her arms, a wide smile plastered on her face. She kissed my cheek, her lips cool, her eyes darting toward the corners of the kitchen as though checking for witnesses. "You look tired, Mom," she said sweetly. "I'll cook tonight." Just like when I was a kid. I nodded, lowering myself into Richard's old armchair in the living room. "That's thoughtful of you, sweetheart." From my seat, I could see into the kitchen. Caroline moved with efficiency, chopping vegetables, seasoning chicken, humming under her breath. It looked like any ordinary family dinner, except for the small orange bottle she pulled from her purse when she thought I wasn't looking. I caught it in the corner of my vision. She tapped a few tablets into her palm, crushed them flat beneath the blade of a knife, and stirred the powder into the bubbling pot. My stomach turned, but I kept my face calm. The microphone against my chest picked up every scrape of metal, every whisper of poison entering my meal. "Dinner's almost ready," she called brightly. "Smells wonderful," I said, forcing a smile. She served me a heaping plate, more food than I could possibly eat, and settled across from me with a smaller portion. Her eyes never left my fork. "Try it, Mom," she urged. "I made it just the way you used to." I lifted a bite, chewed slowly, then dabbed the napkin to my mouth. I managed to swallow only a fraction, slipping the rest into the folded cloth when her gaze flicked down. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to keep the act steady. After a few minutes, a buzzing filled my ears, my heart racing faster than it should. Even the small dose I'd ingested was enough to rattle my system. Caroline leaned forward, feigning concern. "Are you okay, Mom? You don't look well." "I feel strange," I murmured, the words genuine. My chest tightened, dizziness edging my vision. Her smile flickered, just for a second, a glimmer of triumph before she rearranged her face into worry. "Maybe you should lie down. I'll help you to bed." Number. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I leaned closer to the wire taped beneath my blouse and whispered, barely audible, "Butterfly." The kitchen door burst open a heartbeat later. Uniformed officers flooded the room, shouting commands. Caroline's fork clattered against her plate as she jumped to her feet, her face cycling through confusion, rage, and finally panic. "What's happening?" she shrieked. "Mom, what did you do?" Detective Ruiz strode forward, badge in hand, voice steady as stone. "Caroline Mitchell, you are under arrest for attempted murder." Caroline backed against the wall, shaking her head furiously. No, I was just taking care of her. She's sick, she's confused." But the evidence was already on tape. The crushed tablets, the poisoned food, my wire capturing every word. Paramedics rushed to my side, checking my pulse, my blood pressure. "We need to get her to the ER, possible potassium overdose," one of them said, already strapping a monitor to my wrist. Caroline screamed as officers cuffed her wrists. "Mom, how could you do this to me? We're family." I met her eyes, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. Family doesn't try to bury each other for money. As they led her away, her shouts echoing down the hall, I sagged against the paramedic's arms. Relief, grief, fury, all of it swirled inside me. Richard had trusted me to stand strong. Tonight I had. But this battle wasn't over yet. Because Eric was still out there. And I knew he wouldn't go down quietly. The courthouse smelled of old wood and nervous sweat. Reporters lined the steps outside, microphones thrust like weapons toward anyone with the faintest connection to the case. "Otter tries to poison mother for $45 million inheritance." The headlines had spread from the local paper to national television. I never wanted fame, not this kind. But justice requires light, and light was finally shining on the truth. Inside the courtroom, Caroline sat at the defense table, wearing a conservative navy suit her lawyer had surely chosen to make her look respectable. But nothing could soften the sharpness in her eyes. Eric sat beside her, his tie crooked, his jaw tight. They looked less like grieving family and more like business partners whose scheme had collapsed. Across the aisle, Joshua sat with a social worker. His long legs jutted awkwardly into the space ahead of him, his face pale. He didn't look at his parents. He didn't look at me either. He stared at the floor, lost in a world no 17-year-old should have to navigate. The prosecutor began with the videos. Footage of Caroline slipping into my kitchen at 2:17 a.m., the camera capturing Eric rifling through my drawers. Audio of their whispered conversation. The break thing didn't work. A little extra potassium will look natural. The jury flinched. Some shook their heads. Then came the recording from the night of the poisoned dinner. My voice faint, wavering. Butterfly. And the sound of officers bursting in, followed by Caroline's protests. When the prosecutor rested, the defense tried their best. They painted Caroline as a desperate daughter, overwhelmed by debt, frightened for her mother's well-being. Eric claimed he'd gone along only out of loyalty to his wife, but the evidence was too clear, too cold. The turning point came when Detective Ruiz testified. She laid out the surveillance, the planning, the meticulous detail. "In my 15 years on the force," she said firmly, "I've never seen a case where intent was this obvious. This wasn't a mistake. It was murder in the making." Caroline's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. When it was my turn, I walked to the witness stand slowly, my ribs still tender from the crash, my hands trembling despite my resolve. The clerk swore me in. "Mrs. Carter," the prosecutor asked gently, "why are you here today?" I looked at Caroline, my only daughter, and forced myself not to cry. Because I was nearly killed by the people who should have protected me. Because my husband trusted me with his legacy, and I refused to let greed erase his memory. Because forgiveness does not mean forgetting, and it does not mean enabling. The words echoed in the hushed room. For once, Caroline's mask cracked, her lips twisted, her eyes burning with something that wasn't shame, it was rage. The jury deliberated less than 3 hours. "Guilty," the foreman said, voice steady. "On all counts. Conspiracy, attempted murder, burglary." Caroline's shoulders slumped. Eric cursed under his breath. The judge pronounced sentence, 25 years each, with no possibility of parole before 15. The gavel fell, sharp as a coffin lid closing. Afterward, in the hallway, Joshua finally looked at me. His eyes brimmed with tears he wouldn't let fall. "Grandma," he whispered, "I'm sorry." I pulled him into my arms, his lanky frame shaking. "You have nothing to be sorry for, Joshua. None of this was your doing." "But they're my parents," he said, his voice breaking. "I know," I murmured, stroking his hair. "And they made their choices. You'll make different ones. Better ones." He nodded against my shoulder, clinging like a child even though he was nearly a man. In that moment, I knew the cycle could break. Richard's legacy wasn't just money, it was strength. It was the courage to choose justice, even when blood ties pulled the other way. As I left the courthouse, cameras flashed, voices called my name. I ignored them. The real verdict wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet knowledge that I had survived, that truth had triumphed, and that I would never again mistake silence for safety. Caroline and Eric were behind bars. The inheritance remained intact, but more importantly, so did I. 6 months after the verdict, the house felt different. Not haunted anymore, but lighter, as though Richard's quiet strength had settled into the walls. The bruises on my ribs had faded, the stitches on my forehead left only a faint scar, and my heart beat steadier each morning. I woke to sunlight spilling across the kitchen table. Caroline and Eric were serving their sentences. 25 years. The newspapers had moved on to fresher scandals, but neighbors still gave me cautious nods when I passed them in the market. I had become that woman, the one who caught her own daughter plotting murder. Some pitied me, others admired me. I didn't care. All I wanted was peace. But peace never comes from silence alone. It comes from purpose. With Mark Douglas's help, I established the Richard Carter Foundation for Elder Protection. $25 million of Richard's legacy went into that fund, dedicated to helping seniors preyed upon by their own families. The rest, $20 million, was more than enough for me to live simply, comfortably in the home Richard and I had built together. The first case we took on was a widow whose son had been forging her checks for years. Another was a grandfather tricked into signing over his house deed. Their stories echoed mine in painful ways, but this time I could offer more than sympathy. I could offer protection, justice. Each time we helped another senior reclaim dignity, I felt Richard's hand on my shoulder, steady and proud. Joshua came to live with me after the trial. At 17, he was lanky and uncertain, a boy pulled between loyalty to his parents and horror at what they had done. He studied hard, graduated with honors, and enrolled in college that fall, majoring in criminal justice. "I want to help people like you, Grandma," he told me one evening, sitting at the kitchen table with textbooks spread around him. "People who trusted their families and got betrayed. I want to make sure it doesn't happen again." I looked at him, this boy who had seen too much but still carried a kind heart, and felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. 2 years later, on the anniversary of the trial, I received a letter from Caroline in prison. The handwriting was still the same, neat, careful, the kind she'd perfected in Catholic school. She wrote about painting classes, about earning a degree behind bars. But the last paragraph revealed the truth hadn't changed her as much as I'd hoped. "Everything I did," she wrote, "came from love. Love for my family, love for Joshua. Maybe my methods were wrong, but my intentions came from the right place. Someday, I hope you can forgive me." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness does not mean allowing someone back into your life to hurt you again. My answer to her request would remain silence, because silence, in this case, was strength. Now, at 71, I rise each morning not with fear but with purpose. The foundation has helped over 300 seniors, recovered millions of stolen dollars, and put dozens of abusers behind bars. More than statistics, though, are the faces, men and women who thought they were alone, until someone finally said, "You matter. You're not a burden. You deserve respect." Joshua visits often, bringing laundry, stories from his classes, and an appetite that keeps me cooking far more than I should. He calls me strong. I call him my second chance. If you're listening to my story and you recognize yourself in it, if you feel pressure from family who see you not as a person but as a wallet, know this: you are not alone. There are laws, there are allies, and there is life beyond betrayal. And if you recognize someone else, a parent, a grandparent, who might be in my place, don't turn away. Don't excuse cruelty just because it comes wrapped in family ties. Richard left me $45 million. Caroline tried to take it. In the end, I lost my daughter but found something more valuable: the courage to protect myself, and the strength to protect others. Family conflict may shatter your heart, but it doesn't have to break you.